So welcome everyone. Was just doing a little bit of chat ahead of starting the recording, confirming people have gotten their converted data. And hopefully you had a chance to watch those videos that had been made a while back showing the comparison between the two. Today I'm going to focus on just running through a payroll process from entering the hours to calculating the payroll to creating the checks and then paying the tax liabilities. I notice some of you, when we converted the data, are not using the pay tax liabilities feature in People's Choice Classic. It's still indicating they're open. I'm assuming you have been going online. I think pretty much everybody's required to pay online now their payroll tax deposits. So, but we'll go through that process and how you enter that check in. I mean, quite a few of the people that use People's Choice Classic only use it for payroll, and say they don't track their bank balance, and they'll give their backup to the accountant. And so some of the things like paying tax liabilities and so forth haven't been used in the system, but we're going to be going over it in the new program as if you are managing a checkbook and creating checks. The thing to know about People's Choice Payroll is it's built on a general ledger platform. So everything that's created in the payroll module is actually posted into the general ledger. And whether you use the general ledger or the checkbook, that information is there. And for those who don't use the checkbook, you may want to consider start using it in the new version, even if you're giving your information to the accountant, because you can actually get some general ledger reports that the accountant could use to post his journal entries into their system if they're the ones that are managing your balance sheet and income statement type of thing. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just going to shut off my videos because I'm going to be looking to the left again. And so just a little bit of reminder, there's that link. It's also, that link is posted in the chat. If you have some problems, questions, some suggestions on enhancements, so forth, go ahead and put that. That gets set directly. It doesn't go right into support. It goes into our Masterclass support side of things, which, as I've mentioned in some of my emails, is not considered high priority support like we would give a customer who's doing payroll and they're having problems with their payroll. Those people obviously get brought right to the top of the list as far as supporting. Where in this, we're doing everything after the fact as an exercise. And so hopefully we can respond by email, any problems you might run into, or you can bring up your questions or problems during the question and answer period. I don't know if any of you are providing a backup or anything to your accountant, but there is an accountant's copy that can be available, that if you're one that wants to make a backup of your payroll to give to your accountant to do the filing. We have quite a few users that do that. So we're going to have basically two parts today. One's going to be covering the payroll processing, and then the other is going to go into the basic checkbook entry, to entering checks, entering deposits, and the two basic things most of you are doing on a day-to-day basis. A few of you do use the accounts receivable module. We're not going to cover much on that. I don't know if it'll be next week or the following week. We'll have one of these office sessions that's just for the accounts receivable users. And those of you who don't use or plan to use the accounts receivable module may just decide to skip that particular office hour session. But today, even if you don't use the checkbook, you'll see how the payroll system does tie to the checkbook and the general ledger. And it does that in your classic program too, and whether you've taken advantage of it or not. So when we converted your data, there were some totals that we compared before we gave it to you. I'm going to go and review what those reports were, and you may want to do some of that on your own, and that'll get you more familiar of where the equivalents of the reports are in the new program versus your old program. So in that vein, these are broken down into the different modules that are being used. So for those of you who are only using it for payroll, what we've done is we printed a tax liability register in People's Choice Classic from the first of the year to the end of September. And to get both the employer and the employee share, you have to print that twice, as if you've used that before. The report that you can match totals up with is in the People's Choice Accounting is the payroll summary report for the same date range. And so we compare the withholdings and the gross taxable pay for the different taxes and so forth to make sure they match up with your tax liability register. If you find a problem at all in doing your own comparisons, you can go ahead and make note of that. And if you're planning to use this as a practice and will get your data converted again to go live, then that's a piece of information that we'll want to make note of to make sure that whatever that problem might be is corrected when you convert your data to go live. And then we'll do a 941 report in the new version, and you can go ahead and compare that to your classic version on your own. But we'll go through the process of how to generate the 941 form. In the banking reports, the main thing you could do to compare is to print out a bank account activity report. Maybe you want to do it from the first of the year to the end of September and do the same thing in the converted data. There's a bank account activity report, just so you know everything's matching up when we did the conversion. If you were using the accounting module, you could print a trial balance in the old system and a trial balance in the new system. There will be a trial balance in the converted data. Oops, looks like I didn't get the years changed on that. You'd want to do it for the end of 24. But otherwise, if you were using the accounting module, go ahead and do a trial balance as of the end of last month and compare it to the converted data. And in the accounts receivable, we just mainly compared the aging between the two systems. And there's options in both to age by invoice date or age by due date. So if you're going to do your own comparison, just make sure that you use the same basis for both. I would suggest the one by invoice date. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed to go through a payroll cycle. The major thing that's different, as if you've watched the video that I sent out earlier this week, is in the classic program, you're doing one check at a time. And in the People's Choice desktop, you're doing a payroll in batches. So if you have 5 people in the payroll, instead of generating 5 individual checks, you're going in and entering the hours for all 5 and then calculating them for all 5. And then you review that. And if everything looks good in the review, then you go ahead and create checks, and it creates all the checks. And then you proceed to print. So that's the process we're going to go through. And I'm going to bring that up right now. So you should see our PCC convert to PCA. The sample company is actually a New Hampshire company, which doesn't have state withholding. So regardless of, it's still going to calculate state in your case, but obviously some of the participants from different states. So it'll still cover the main calculations of your payroll in terms of the process. And you're encouraged to practice to do the same thing on your own with the converted data. So the menu that we have is the Premier menu. As we indicated before, many of you are basic. And when we converted the data, if you're just on basic and aren't using receivables or payables, then we set up the menu that doesn't have the sales item or the purchase item. It would just have banking, accounting, reports, set up, utilities, and payroll. So from a standpoint of your People's Choice Classic, most of you outside of payroll on that day-to-day operations is basically everything that you do in day-to-day operations in Classic, you're going to be doing in banking in the new version. And essentially you're going to be entering checks and deposits. And as we indicated, one of the things that we compared right out of the gate was for each bank account, we compared that your bank balance matched the one you had in Classic with the data that you gave us. And if you had more than one bank account, this company doesn't, we compared each one of those. So what we're going to go ahead and do, we'll come back to this in the part two. We're going to go ahead and go into payroll. And that's going to bring us to the main menu of the payroll module. And as I have indicated, all the checks that we create in payroll will end up in the accounting module. And if you go into banking journals, and we'll go look at that after we do a payroll, and you'll see that those checks are entered in there, as well as any pay, tax deposit and so forth that we pay. So this is your main menu, and on a day or week to week or bi-week or however often you pay, this particular sample is going to be on a weekly. You go into run a payroll. Where we're at is in a January, and it's click next pay run, and it's going to advance the dates. This is a weekly payroll. You may want to note in the options that we have to have the pay frequency here to match up with the pay frequency of the pay types that you're using. In most cases, you are only using one pay type, although there was one of our students in this class that have a biweekly and a weekly pay type. And here's where the checkbook that you're using, the bank account that you're drawing your payroll from is set up here. But there are a number of other options here. We won't get into any depth, but there is direct deposit, and then there are special checks where maybe you don't want to have the deductions or benefit calculated. If you do some people do multiple pay runs each pay period, they'll break things down. If you don't want it to automatically advance the pay period, you would uncheck this box. But I'm going to go ahead and we'll process as if we had a payroll last week, and now it's this week's payroll. So we're going to click next pay run, and you'll see that the dates automatically got advanced on this weekly pay run. Highlighting here, I'm going to go into enter pay data. And this is going to bring up your list of employees, and it's going to bring up the hours you entered for those employees the last time you did payroll. So if everything was the same, you could click done and move on. Or if for whatever reason, this person only worked 30 hours last week, but this week they worked 40 hours. And maybe we'll just say this person down here worked 3 hours overtime. Now there is a setting, and we can help you set that up. But by default, when we converted the data, if you're like weekly, 40 hours is considered a normal week, and you could enter in 50 hours here. And if it's set up, it'll automatically take 10 hours and put them into overtime. A lot of people shut that switch off and they manually enter it in, because there's situations where you will work 45 hours, but you don't pay overtime and so forth. Or there's times if you work more than 8 hours and at one day you get 2 hours overtime if it's over 8, those kinds of situations. So even though you may only work 40 hours in a week, if one of those days of the week you worked over 8 hours, you still maybe get overtime for those particular hours. And if you get into where there's maybe 24-hour pay periods, some people get paid a different rate, and so you can set up different pay types. But this is just your basic hourly, and this is what most of you have. And we can get into some of the more complicated payrolls as questions arise. So we've entered in our pay data, then we just click done and go to step 2 and click calculate. And so that proceeds to calculate the taxes. And then we go to step 3 and click on calc report. And that just brings up, we haven't created checks yet, but it brings up what the checks that are going to be created. So this gives you the opportunity to go and look at the hours and their hourly rate and make sure the gross and everything's calculated correctly and all the taxes are calculated correctly and the employer share are calculated correctly. There's no deductions in this particular one, but if you have deductions, and many of you do, make sure those are calculated correctly. And then we would go ahead and say, nope, that looks good. And we're not tracking vacation, so we aren't going to do anything there. So we're ready to create checks. And I'm not going to make a backup. And this is my next computer check number. You still have the option to not use computer checks, but I think most of you are using. And then you go ahead and create checks. And then you can run a report. This report here is essentially the exact same report as the calculation report. The only thing that's different with it is it has the check numbers assigned to each of the employees. And this particular report, also at the end, is a recap of this particular pay run. So this is the total of gross pay, and this is the employer share of the taxes. And so for the employer, this is what this payroll costs, $6,435.08. But the gross payroll itself was the $59.53. But then you've withheld $1,658.28 in taxes up here, the employee taxes. And so the total of all the net checks is $42.94.72. So it's just a recap of what you've done. So you've done the payroll. This is where you could also print pay stubs down the road if you implement a direct deposit. You wouldn't print a check. You would just print to plain paper a stub that shows the deductions, just like the stub on a paycheck. So if everything's fine there, then you would go ahead and click print. And I'm not going to print checks, but we'd go through the process of printing the checks, and then you can distribute the checks. And I would say no, and then we go ahead and we're ready for the next pay run. Now, most of you, not everybody, some pay monthly, some pay quarterly, but many of you pay your tax liabilities as soon as you get done with your payroll. So if you go into pay tax liabilities, there's the 940. Now, most people don't pay those until the end of the quarter, and we're just in the first quarter for this sample company. But for your 941 taxes, many people pay them as they do their payroll. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all. I'm going to click create check. Now, in most cases, you're filing this or doing your deposit online, so you're not actually writing a check. So instead of a computer check, you typically are just going to use other. And this is mainly important if you are using People's Choice to keep your checkbook, because even though you paid it online, it's still coming out of your bank account, and you want to log a check transaction in your book. So this is what will create that step. And you do have separate check number sequences, and then whatever the check date would be. Now, we're dealing in the past, so typically this is going to be done on, if it was based on what our pay is, it's going to be done on that date. So you go ahead and create check. Some people will print it and staple it with their confirmation of their online deposit. I'm not going to print that check now. Like I said, there's no state, but you could go and do your state deposits if you had state. And same way of unemployment, you could go ahead and make your unemployment. Now, some people don't pay their unemployment except quarterly. So same with the 940. So you can just leave them, and they'll keep accumulating. As you could see, each of the pay periods that there was the unemployment, just like here, each of the federal unemployment for each of the pay runs that we've done here. So that's how you go pay the tax liabilities. That same process is used. There's none in this company, but if you have deductions and you're like health insurance and you're sending in a check, you would do the same approach where all the withholdings would be, and you could go down and create a check. And that would be the check that, again, it could be an online payment to the insurance company or 401k contributions or that type of thing. But those would be put up through the third party. And we'll get into a little more detail. This particular exercise is just trying to run a basic payroll. So you can run reports at any time. I'm going to go ahead and run one other payroll just so you can kind of get a feel of the process. So it's a week later. We're going to go click next pay run. I got that prompt because I didn't print the checks. So we want to go ahead and advance the dates. We go into enter pay data. You can see we have the hours that we did on that previous one. And so the only thing that's different this week is there was no overtime. Otherwise, everybody worked the same number of hours. And then you would click calculate. And again, you can review the calc report. Now, the reason I wanted to do this is when you go to do your own, if you're going to re-enter in with your converted data, the last payroll you did in People's Choice Classic, quite possibly a lot of you will experience where the Social Security and or Medicare will calculate 2 to 10 cents different than what the calculation is in Classic. The reason for that is Classic just always calculates it as is, it rounds as is, but it doesn't accumulate the rounding throughout the year like the upgraded version does. And so with the upgraded, we call it the autocorrect, is it looks at your gross taxable pay for Social Security for the year and takes that times the rate and comes and then divides it out. And on a payroll to payroll basis, this Social Security displays here is 66.96, but the actual calculation might be 66.958, but we can't put fractions of a cent in the report. But if it's 958, it rounds it up to 6696. Well, if you do the same thing every week, eventually you actually need another penny. Or if it was calculating it at 6694 or 954, we're going to round it down to 6695. But that'll accumulate. So what it does, and many of you are just going to start at the beginning of the year, so it's not a big deal. You just let the calculations calculate. But you'll notice over a course of the year that for some employees, it might be 66.96 this week and 66.96 next week and 66.96 the week after that. But then the week after that, it's 66.95 or 66.97. And that's the autocorrect feature taken in effect. So during the course of the year, you may see a variance of a penny from week to week or paycheck to paycheck. But so if you really wanted to match everything up, and this tip I'm going to be giving here can be used for any kind of editing. You can say, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and edit this. And I'm going to say that when I ran it in Classic, it actually calculated on this particular check 1565. And the Medicare and this one maybe was 95. Well, and then if that was, you want to match it, you probably want to go here and change this to 65 and this one to 95 so that they match up. So that'll match it up. And then assuming the federal taxes were the same and any deductions, the net check displayed up here should equal the net check that was calculated in Classic. And then you could go ahead and edit each of the checks and then proceed to create. But keep in mind, it's going to autocorrect next week because unless you go back and and work backwards, and you do the payroll here and let it calculate, and then go back to Classic and recreate it, you would want to edit it in Classic to match what was calculated here. So that's the only confusion you may run into between now and the end of the year if you're going to try to run side by side. What we kind of discussed at the last office hours was this is all going to be practice. And so if you don't want to mess with matching it up penny for penny, but you see that it's basically calculating and you understand how the process works. If you just wait, if you're starting to go live January 1st, then that whole auto rounding and comparing it with Classic isn't anything you need to deal with. So anyway, so we'll just say that I made those edit results. I didn't do it to all of them, but you can go back then and look at the calc report, and you can see the changes of the taxes that we edited here. And so then if that matches up, then we can go ahead and create checks. If you see, oh, I forgot to, if you go back here and it was like, oh, Julie did get 3 hours overtime, you still can go and say recalculate and go back in and add the 3 hours to Julie and click done and click calculate, and then go to the calc report again and then review everything to make sure that they got their overtime. So we got that updated. So we got that corrected. And then if you wanted to edit, you can. The only maybe a little caveat I should mention about editing is if you have deductions, and those are pre-tax deductions like a 401k where they deduct the amount of the deduction from your taxable wage. If you edit that, then it's going to force you to recalculate, because editing that is going to change your tax calculations. But in our particular case, that didn't impact anything, and so we're ready to proceed. You're not using it now, we can review it in a little more detail later. But if you are tracking vacation or sick pay or holiday pay, it's mainly used for sick pay or personal pay. A lot of people have combined sick pay and personal pay is one and the same thing. Personal days, different terms are used. You would go in here and you can pull up what kind of tracking you're doing. Let's say paid personal hours, and then you can pick the employee that had paid personal hours and the quantity they used. So it would subtract from the amount of vacation that's available. So that's available, but we're not using that in this particular situation. So we're just going to go ahead and again, we can just go ahead and create checks, and we're done there, and we can still go and pay our tax liabilities. You'll see that all those got added to the 941. We got to our 940 and our 941. There's the new ones. We're going to go ahead and create the check for that. And again, we'll change it to 212 and say create check. And no, we're not going to print it. So that's the main objective is what I would call day-to-day or week-to-week or bi-week to bi-week process that you go through. In another section, we'll get into setting up your templates. And these templates would be, so if most of you have hourly paid weekly, we can go and we can set up the default for a new employee. You know, if you have deductions or the different pay types or taxes or benefits, you can all set it up as one template. So when you go to create or add a new employee, then those templates can be used. So you don't have to manually add all those pay types and taxes and everything that are typically done. It's just going to all be set up in their ledger card. This is the ledger card that you get used to. And it's going to be here where you would assign what template you're going to use for any new employee. this data was converted from Classic, and so it didn't use a template in the setup. It was using the way it was set up in Classic, and you can review that setup a little later. So that's the main flow of doing a payroll. And in this particular one, like I said, this was a Classic data set that we converted to there. And so you can kind of see when you go to try it for your own, you should see your employees in this screen, and you should be able to run through this process that I just did in yours. And if you have problems on that, please make note of that. And you may want to go ahead and submit a request stating whatever your problem was. If we think when we get that message that it was a problem with your conversion for some reason that we didn't catch, we may touch base with you directly. Or if it's just something, oh, that's a good question, we'll answer it in next week's session, and we can proceed from there. So before we go on to talking about checks and deposits, I did say we were going to run a 941, so I will run the 941. So you can do this throughout the quarter. It doesn't have to be at the end of the quarter. Same way in your Classic program, you can always do that 941 report, but you would go in and click Run the Report. And as been indicated, unlike the Classic, which is just a report, you got to refill out the form. This is actually going to fill out the form for you that you can sign and mail in. Come on. So since this particular one, our data is all in the first quarter, I'm going to select the first quarter. But for yours, your converted data, I believe all of you had your data after October 1st, so you should be able to do your third quarter. Actually, you could do it. You could use this to file for a third quarter if it matches up with what your Classic is. So it's going to bring up the form on screen. Oh, what did I do? I picked third quarter. I'm sorry. I should have picked first quarter. But with your converted data, you could do all three quarters so far this year. So if you wanted to do first quarter and second quarter, you could go ahead and do that and just redo this process like I'm doing right now. Only instead of selecting the third quarter like I did, in our case, this time we're going to select the first quarter and display the total of the first quarter. So we'll select first quarter. Most of you probably have a Schedule B, but you can look at page 1 of the 941 here, page 2 here, and if you have a Schedule B, it'll be displayed here. Like I said, we're not done with first quarter in this data set, so it's only showing month 1 and 2 so far. And so same way with page 1, it's only going to display so far what we've done in payroll in this quarter, and we haven't done we can't edit this, but in a complete quarter, it uses the number of employees you had on the 12th of the second month of the quarter. So in case of the the third month of the quarter. So in the case of this is the number of employees on March 12th, on the next quarter on June 12th, and so forth. So there's 0 employees since we haven't done a payroll that covers March 12th in this data set. Otherwise, here's your data. If you've been doing the pay tax liabilities, it should show a balance due of 0. If you haven't entered those pay tax liabilities like I was talking earlier or showing earlier, then it would say in this case that you owe $12,135.91. So you have everything here. And if everything looks good, you can go ahead and click print. And that's going to do a print preview of each of the forms. And you can go ahead and print out paper and sign it. and mail it in. Click done, and we'll turn to the payroll system.
So the one report that I mentioned that you would want to compare, the 941
that we just did, you'd want to go ahead and maybe compare with your classic data. But you can also go into the general reports. This is the report that I kind of call it the all-encompassing report. So if you wanted to compare it with last, you can do it by date, do it by year, you can do it by quarter. In this case, I'm just going to say this quarter, since we're still in the first quarter in this data set. Oops, I can't say this quarter. I got to say, well, I'm going to say this year, and I'll change this to, so this, even though we haven't gotten through the third quarter or first quarter completely, we still can do this. So when we print preview, this is, it looks a lot different than your tax liabilities. What the totals that you would be wanting to look at from a pay of the total liability would be this section down here. But what this displays, you'll notice that it has their wages listed 3 times. If you have state tax, it'd be listed 4 times. So this is the FICA wages, 5,060, the taxable, and this is the withholding of 7359. Same with Social Security and what was withheld. Same for federal withholding and what was withheld. Now, all these may look rather redundant to have these 2 columns because they're all the same in this particular example. But if you do have pre-tax deductions, or if you set up a pay type like mileage that isn't taxable, whatever, that mileage is still going to show up here. But let's just say you had a 401k deduction of $200. So if it was $200 here, the wages were still $5,076, but the taxable would be $5,076 minus $200. And that's the amount that's going to show up on your W-2. So you could also go ahead and print W-2. So if you wanted to print as another comparative report, you could print the W-2 report in Classic, and you could go ahead and process W-2s in, do a test processing of W-2s in the new version, and you could compare those totals. But those taxable totals are going to show up just like they show up in each of these employees in this column here. And the same is true of the, over here is the employer liabilities. So it's the same liable amount. You can see it's early in the year, so we're still paying unemployment tax. But as most of you know, once this one has hit the limit, because the limit on federal unemployment is $7,000. So it's going to stop withholding or calculating a liability because it's reached the limit. And for any of you who may have employees or the owners who make over, I believe this year it's 168,600, then that's the limit for Social Security. And so it'll stop withholding Social Security at that limit. And same Medicare, there's no limit, so it's going to continue calculating. Although if you have employees that make over $200,000, once that happens, they have to pay an extra 0.9% Medicare tax. The employer doesn't have to do that, but the employee has to pay that extra Medicare tax once they have gross taxable wages over $200,000. So that's something to keep in mind. It'll do it automatically. If you get kicked into that, then you'll probably want to shut off the switch in that options to warn when the employer and employee taxes don't match. It gives you a warning because in most cases, until you reach that Medicare limit, they should match. But you might want to uncheck the Medicare one in that one so you don't get that warning every time. But it would just be a warning in that case that someone has earned over $200,000. So that's the one that's, like I said, kind of a recap. If you want, there's a variety of other reports. What some will run is the 941 report. Again, that can be done by date range, anything. So if we were to do it again for the current quarter in this data set. I'll just do it this year. Be 03. When I normally process 941, I'll still print this report and compare the totals on here to make sure that they're the same on the this 941 report. And what you would be looking at is at the end here to make sure these numbers match the total numbers on your 941 report. But you can also do an overall liability report. This particular report just shows the taxes for the 941, the federal and Medicare and Social Security, but the overall report is going to show you oops, sorry about that, hit the wrong button. I'll just do it for this year. It doesn't really matter since there isn't anything past February anyway. And it's formatted just like the 941 liabilities report, only besides that, those taxes, it also has your federal unemployment and your state unemployment. And if you had state withholding, it'd have those totals here. So it would have all the taxes that you're calculating here. And then at the end of the quarter, when this is showing quarter one, you can do the state unemployment report that will show the wages and the state unemployment tax that's going to be due, and that's filed with the state. So I'm going to move on to the next section, but we can pause it for. Okay. So, are there any questions on that section of it? You can either unmute yourself and say, I have a question, or you can go ahead and enter something in the chat of something. Otherwise, again, this is being recorded, so we'll be sending it out. So you can rewatch this if you're going to watch this and then do your own tests and do a side-by-side. But then while you're doing that, if you have questions that do come up, I jot them down as you see them, or, oh, God, I got to remember to ask that question. It's a good time to jot it down, and then you could go ahead and go to that link to submit a request to say, hey, I'm running into this problem, or hey, I do this on my payroll, but you didn't show that last week, and you show that, bring that up next week. So feel free to bring up questions or problems that you might have. So if we don't have any other questions, let's move on. So we're going to go back into the accounting module, and we're just going to focus on the direct disbursement checks and deposits. And that's what most of you you're doing. Doesn't have accounts payable, but you didn't really have accounts payable in Classic. Not everybody is using this, but we'll go ahead and cover it and some of the variations on that. So let's switch back to our demo company, and we're going to go ahead and go into accounting. And like I mentioned, anything you enter in the way of transactions in the payroll module, they're still going to show up if you go into your banking. It's like I said, it's like going into your day-to-day operations in Classic. And if you want to look at the banking journals, you could see all the checks that we created today are showing up here, and our bank balance is updated accordingly. And you could see the 941 payment that I made as far as those pay tax liabilities. So you could see there's a combination of payroll checks, and in this case, internal revenue, those deposits that we made. So in this case, this screen is much like what you're used to in Classic, where you see, for those who are using the checkbook, will see the combination of the two together. Now, so your check should show up just like they were in Classic. If you go to that with the converted data, you could, most of your check creation though, if you're using it for disbursements, is going to be done from that check shortcut. And again, you can bring up that list of checks that you've issued and all your checks that you've entered. You can go in, and if you want to click on one and look at that particular check, you can see in this case it's labeled a tax payment check. If it was a printed check, it would say it would be printed. So you can search on existing checks either by check number, or we'll sort it by check number, or sort it by date, and sort it by date, or if you want to sort and find by payee, or even by memo, or even by amount. So there's a variety of ways to search for a particular check. Most people are searching either by date or by check number. But if you're going to create a new check, you basically just come here and click new, and you're filling out a check. Now, right now it's defaulted to other, meaning that typically the other check number is used for online payments, but we have the computer check and we have the manual check. Now you'll see this Easy Pay check, ACH. These are 3 new check types that are going to be released soon, where you can pay with an ACH to a lot of business-to-business payments. They prefer you do it as an ACH versus as a computer check or doing it online. But we have a variety of ones. So we're going to pretend this is a computer check, and that's, you have pre-printed checks. Your classic checks in the middle are very close to the check format. So most of the classic users that convert continue to use up their existing classic checks. But then when you reorder, you'll want to go down to the People's Choice forms and order the checks that's designed for the PCA desktop, that the date and the amount boxes are slightly different. Otherwise, both stubs are blank, just like they are in Classic. So if you're going to come in and write a check, all the vendors that you had in your Classic system are going to be in this drop-down list. And so we can pick a particular one. It'll fill in the address. This one wasn't assigned to a particular default account. So it's like, wait a minute, I want to assign that to a default account. Now, if you did have, it does have that one. Guess it would help if I put in a dollar amount, though. So the dollar amount, it breaks it down here, just like it does in your Classic. In Classic, what you normally do is click Save. In this system, you would click Post. Now, in terms of your Classic system, let's say we're going to write another check, and we select, I'm going to save that for that particular one, and that one was for $250. And when we didn't have a default account, so what you can do is go down, and these account numbers that you see here are going to be exactly like the account numbers you have in your Classic program. And so, you can assign this to computer services, but maybe the $200 of it. So if you were going to split it up, maybe you do that in your Classic, then you would just put in the amount that goes to that particular category, and the rest can go to consulting or whatever the total might be. So now our breakdown is $250 here. That matches this. So we can click Post. Now, if you're going to be printing the checks, which since this is computer, you would obviously do. If you were entering in manual checks, then you could go there. I posted this so it's locked. To print the check, you would go here to print. And again, you can print the queue if you want to see what checks are in the queue. You can see these are the checks that are in the queue. I'm just going to remove this, and this is the only one I'm going to print. Or the other option be, I only want to print the current check. You can select that and go ahead and click print.
I wanted to cover, and as it related to check writing, is we did the checks from scratch. The other thing That's
available is you can go down and go, oh, this check is the same. We don't have that many. Let's just say we're writing a check to Safe Choice, and we're writing a check that's the same amount as the last time. And so there's a duplicate button here, and it'll duplicate that check. That one was manual. We're going to make this one computer. Here's the date. And so the description's the same, and we can post. So that's one way of duplicating a check. The other thing that I wanted to cover is recurring checks. So the duplicate is one way of doing that. In recurring checks, if you go into here, we have two of them that are set up so far. One for the city utilities, and the amount is a fixed amount, and it's monthly, and it's always for this. And so it's something we do every month. The other one, it says 65 here, but you can set it up at 0, but then every month you just change the amount because it may be a monthly one, but it fluctuates from month to month. And so to add to this, you would click new. How often does this particular one? So most of them are going to be monthly, but you could set up an annual one if you had some annual lease payment or something. But most of them are going to be monthly. And then you have your particular, let's say you did have a IT agreement or something. And it was typically 150 a month. And so you've set it up as a standard. So to take advantage of the recurring checks, when you go into checks, you can either click recurring here, or when you're in the new one, it's going to go ahead, it's going to bring up your recurring ones. So these first two I'd paid them last month, so that one's due. And this is the new one that we've set up, and this is our monthly phone bill. Although this month, the monthly phone bill was $75. But we're on budget pay for utilities, so that's the same. So everything looks good there. So we can click create checks. And then, what date is it we want? I'm going to go ahead and do the 23rd. That seems to be the time that I'm normally, 3 checks were created. So each of those checks, if you go here, you'll see those 3 checks are created here. And then you can go ahead and print or whatever. But it's a quick way, if you have a lot of monthly expenses, just to list all those particular checks, whether they're automatically withdrawn or what. I mean, you could set them up to do it as an other check. So it's just trying to show you all the different flexibilities of how to create checks, duplicate checks, recurring checks. And then the other item that you have is before you post a check, you do on direct disbursements have a check stub. So whatever you type into this box is what's going to print on the check stub. And so if you wanted to itemize some things based on an invoice you got just for your own remittance advice, then you can put that on the check stub. So any other questions on this, you can bring them up after we review the deposits. So again, you can go into the banking journals at this stage of the game, and you can see these other checks that we've created here today. But for deposits, there's 2 types of deposits, just like there are on your classic program. You can go in and click new and do what's called a batch deposit. So it's just a batch deposit of $1,000. You could put in a description of rent, if that's what it was, type of income, and go down and put it into the account category that it would fall into, and go ahead and post it. And that's going to add to your bank balance just like it does in your classic program. Now in the classic program, you have receipts that can be converted to a deposit. To do that in the new system, what you would do is you would click New, and then you would click on Deposit Slip. And here's where it's basically your receipts journal like you have in Classic. And so you can go ahead and type in who a check or cash was from, maybe their check number if they gave you a check, and the amount that they gave you, and whatever it was for. You can type that in. That's not mandatory, but you would want to go ahead and put it into some kind of income category. And then if you had somebody else, and I'll go ahead and use my better half, and she has her own checking account and put in $400. Again, it could be fees or whatever. And but maybe it is a different category of income. Maybe it was a membership fee or whatever. So you can itemize as many checks as you're going to be depositing. It's using today's date. Obviously, you probably, if this was the data here, you would be using a February date based on the sample transactions I've been doing. But when you're done, you would click done. It's saying it's going to add those two up and make the deposit of $900, and it'll distribute it to those two different categories of income or revenue. And then again, you can post and they'll update your bank balance just like it does in Classic. If you want to have a deposit slip, typically I usually do, include the current deposit. I'm not going to print it to paper, but this is what it would look like on paper, but it has an itemization of all your checks. So that you're depositing with this $900 deposit. So that is how you would handle the two different deposits. I think for most of you, picking up entering checks and picking up entering deposits, it's similar enough process it's a pretty fast learning curve, as opposed to the payroll is really a lot different doing it by batches versus doing individual checks. So to do the matching it up, how do I do it in the old system versus how I do it in the new system? When it comes to doing the checks, that's pretty much the same. Other than the whole screen looking different, the functions that they do are much the same.
Roger, can I mention one thing?
Sure.
As far as posting, well, basically posting anything in the banking module. If you don't hit
If you don't post or save,
in the check register, but it will not appear in in your reports until it doesn't hit the general ledger until you actually post it.
right. The general ledger, it will show up in your banking reports, but not in your general ledger reports.
Right.
And so if you do skip it, I mean, you can go back, but you can go into bank batch posting. So like these are a bunch of checks that I haven't been posted. And so you can post them in batches and post them all at once. So like that one batch I didn't deposit. Let me just click none. The other thing you can do is like, what is that night? You can drill down to that deposit. And that's the one we made. Oh, I did forget to post that. Okay, I can just post that one individually. Well, that'll get removed from the list, but you can go, oh yeah, I forgot to post them, sorry. And then you post them.
Okay.
And then that would update all your postings, and then your general ledger would be up to date. Thanks, Christine.
Mm-hmm.
Another report along those lines is if you are doing financial statements or whatever, is at the end of a month, you can go down and you can print a list of unposted banking transactions. So if you're not using accounts receivable or accounts payable, you won't have unposted bills or unposted invoices, but you still could possibly have unposted banking transactions. So your banking, all your reports are handled here. So banking, accounting, most of you basic aren't going to see these first three that are listed here. They're not available in basic. It's only in Premier. The 1099s are here. Now, what's a little different in menu is when you're on Premier, you set up your vendors or suppliers here. If you're on basic and you don't have that sales and purchases, and that vendors shortcut is going to be in this menu here. So if you do need to go in and enter in new vendors, you can do it from the check screen, or you can go into here and click new. If you have certain, let's just find somebody, say, that particular one, we'd say, oh, this person's supposed to have a 1099. So any of your 1099 vendors, is you need to pull them up and come down here and define what 1099 do they have. Is it a 1099 NEC, or is it for rent, or is it for royalties, or for some other income? These are printed on the 1099 MISC, and then there's a separate 1099 NEC and a 1099 interest, which is 1099 INT. Most of you are going to have basically this. I do quite a few users also are going to maybe have one for rents that they pay if they're renting their facility. But then this is going to track your 1099 information, and the 1099 information is handled from this particular shortcut here. And that would be done at the end of the year. There's an update that's the same update as for the W-2s, that also includes updates on the 1099s, and it's processed through this link here, and depending on which 1099 you're using, you select it here. So that was pretty much what I wanted to cover. I didn't want to get too much into the reports. I mainly wanted to cover what I would call day-to-day operations that you're doing in Classic, which for most of you is entering in checks, entering in deposits, and doing payroll checks. And that's pretty much what we covered today. Again, I'm not going to get into the accounts receivable one part of it today. We'll get back to, I guess I was going to show how some of you might want to go to change to printing checks to blank check stock. I will do a quick what you'll be needing to do for that. That would be done in banking. And you would go into bank accounts. You would pull up your bank. Now, when you got your converted data, the bank account number isn't stored in People's Choice Classic. And so for you, you're going to have if you have bank account 1, that's your first bank account. It's just going to be bank account 1, 2, or 3. Where this field up here is usually holds your bank account number. So what you can do, you probably don't want to mess with it until you go live with the data, but you can pull up each of your bank accounts and click on this pencil, and you can go ahead and put in what your actual bank account number is here. Oops, it has to be a number. So you can put your bank account, and when you put change account number, and then that'll get changed. Now that doesn't set it up for MIC or check printing. What you need to do for the MIC or check printing is you need to go down here, and you need to capital C, lowercase c, I mean, gives that symbol, D gives that symbol, A gives that symbol, and B gives that symbol. So for most of you, it's for the routing number, you're going to go A, and then it's a 9-digit number, and then A, and then a space. Oops. And then you would type in your account number, whatever that is. So if it was like what's showing up above, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then C is usually the on a symbol, which is that first symbol. Essentially, what you would want this to look just like if you got a pre-printed check right now, and look at the bottom of the MIC numbering. After you enter it in, this should look just like what it looks like on your check. And then up here in the routing code, you have that fraction that you would put in. And so there's a little fraction in there, and you would just put in the number slash in the lower side of the fraction. So once this is set up, then when you're going to go to print your checks, we do. You would be changing your format. Now, all of you are going to have middle check in the middle, and it's pre-printed because that's what you've been using right now. So, but if you're going to go to plain check stock, you would click on plain paper. And then down here, you want to typically want to print all information. Many of you probably aren't going to have multiple check mark, multiple signatures on yours. And if you were using pre-printed checks, then you want to make sure that you don't reprint the bank info and the company name, because that's what's on pre-printed checks. Same with the maker number. Those changes can be made, and then it's going to print a plain check stock. So something you can be thinking about as you go live. Otherwise, those are the things that we basically covered in the way of checks and deposits. So are there any questions on this part of the program? So if not, hopefully everything made sense to you. And again, I'll be sending out this recording, and we will I'll have some other videos for you to be watching in advance of next week's class. And not everybody, I think everybody that was on attended today's class has some converted data. There's a newer conversion I'm doing for Pam, and Carrie just got hers today. So we'll be picking up a week from now. So if there's no further questions, I'm going to stop.